Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Bits. We're in Genesis 9 still today, and we're going to finish off the chapter this morning, evening or afternoon, whenever you are listening to this. And we're just going to jump right into it. Genesis 9, starting in verse 18. The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. That's kind of a bizarre story. In fact, most people who read it think that the real point of the story is to explain Israel's current state when Genesis is being written. Canaan, obviously relating to the Canaanites, but also other tribes around Canaan, they were at war with Israel constantly. And so, when they see something like "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers," it's kind of talking about Israel subduing Canaan and those peoples. And then when it talks about Japheth dwelling in the tents of Shem, I believe Japheth and Shem together were kind of the seen as the grandfathers of the peoples who were around Israel and Israel itself at the time. The ones who were typically on better terms. They were on better terms with each other. And they saw themselves kind of having a shared kindred in that regard, even though they weren't the same nation. Israel was separate. They had a much friendlier relationship with peoples in certain areas around them as opposed to Canaan, and then you go further to Assyria and places like that. So it's kind of a weird story, but read in that context, it would make sense. But one of the most interesting things about this story is these are the first words, and as far as I can recall, the only words of Noah in Scripture. His only words are, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers," and then the blessing on Shem and Japheth. Noah doesn't get, he's built an ark, he's been rescued, he's seen a giant flood that at the very least destroyed everything around him, if not covered the whole world. And yet somehow these are the very first words of Noah. When we talk about the story of the ark and the flood, we often call it the story of Noah. And we do this because obviously Noah is the main character, even if he doesn't really say anything. But I think we need to be very careful as we're reading Scripture to keep in mind these stories are really not about the people. Yes, David does things, and we learn from his mistakes, and we learn from his good. Solomon does things, and we learn from his mistakes, and we learn from his good. Noah does things, and we learn from his mistakes, because I think clearly Noah made a mistake here in this section of Genesis 9, but we also learn from his good. But really through it all, it's about God. God is really the main character of the flood story, not Noah. Noah does the work. Noah represents humanity in the story. He's our voice, if you will. But the only thing Noah does outside of follow God's commands is apparently get drunk, then get angry at his son, who we don't necessarily know what exactly it is that Ham did. We don't know if him telling his brothers just, "Hey, our dad's naked inside," we don't know if that's kind of what Noah got mad about, or if it was the fact that he didn't cover his father, or if there was something else that happened. We don't really know. But either way, while Ham probably did not act as nobly as he should have, Noah was the one who got drunk. It's not like Ham got Noah drunk and then said, "Hey, go look at our dad. He's doing stupid stuff inside." Noah was really the one at fault in this situation. And yet through it all, we often say Noah's story, the story of Noah and the ark. And we're not wrong to say that, but we need to keep in mind as we're going through Scripture that the tail, the foundation, the person who is carrying this whole thread of salvation for humanity from Genesis all the way into the New Testament and the coming of Christ is not us. We aren't the big players. We're just here to play bit parts in the long story, the long epic, if you will, of God's salvation of mankind. Yeah, there's plenty of other things we could look at in this small section of Scripture here in Genesis 9. We might ask why it is that he cursed Canaan. Why does Noah curse Canaan and not Ham? Canaan didn't do anything, as far as we know. Canaan was just the son of Ham. As far as we know, he didn't do anything wrong. And yet, Noah cursed Canaan. Again, many people see that as an explanation of why it is Israel and the Canaanites and the people from that people group were often at odds with each other. But really, I think the whole point of Noah's story is not really Noah himself. Noah is just an obedient bit player. Yeah, he built an ark, and that's important. We need to be the bit player in our own lives. We need to follow God's commands and do what it is he wants to do, but we should never find ourselves in a position thinking, as we sometimes mistakenly do about Noah, that this is our story. We're the ones in control of this story. We're the heroes of the tale. Even the most magnificent people in Scripture, like David, for instance, really at the end of the day, were entirely reliant on God's good grace. David screwed up constantly. He did more evil things in his life than many of us have ever dreamed of doing. David did. It was God's grace that kept him all the way through. And yes, David was a man after God's own heart. He chased after God. That is important. What David did is a lesson for us. But David was not the hero in Israel's story. God was. David was just a bit player, an important bit player, but a bit player nonetheless. And in the story of Noah and the flood, Noah, he's not really the hero. He's just the bit player. God is the hero. God is the one in control. That's why I think it's so important that really Noah has nothing to say, nothing to add, nothing to do throughout the Genesis account except for whatever God has commanded of him. Noah doesn't go off and decide, yeah, you said to build an ark, but I'm also going to build a pool on top of the ark, and I'm going to build a second little boat for friends and family to join along with. No, Noah just does exactly what God says. But what if Noah had said to himself, you know what, I'm a pretty important guy here. I'm the one who God has chosen out of all these people. I've got it all going on. Well, maybe he plants a vineyard. Maybe he gets drunk. Now, I'm not saying Noah had that kind of hubris in his life. We don't know that he did. But clearly Noah was not a perfect man. There was no law at the time when Noah gets drunk. There's no direct prohibition yet in Scripture against drunkenness. But nowhere in Scripture is drunkenness upheld as something good. Clearly, it's always seen as an evil, and Noah is drunk. Noah is the one at fault in the base of this story. He's the one who's caused the wrong that is then passed on to his sons. And then, moreover, it's not clear that Noah even had the authority to curse Ham. That doesn't mean, we have to keep in mind, just because someone says something in Scripture does not mean God agreed with it. Noah might have cursed Ham, or I guess we should say curse Canaan. That doesn't mean God had to go along with it. It doesn't mean, because Noah said so, now I, God, have to go along. God didn't necessarily have to agree with him. God can do whatever he wants. But Noah seems to have been angry. He was flawed. He had made a mistake. We have to keep in mind that in our own story, we're not the heroes, we're the part player. We're the person who's supposed to fulfill a role set up by God. It's vitally important that we do. And yes, there are accolades that go along with it. Yes, there's glory, so to speak, that goes along with it. But we should never find ourselves at the point where we say, I'm so great. I'm the one doing all these things in my life. I'm the one pressing forward. I'm the one who's doing so well. Because when we do, that's when we're most set up to fail. I'm reminded of the story in the New Testament when Herod, he had just set apart and done some stuff to kind of quell some rebellion. He didn't necessarily do it fully, but he kind of did. And the people started really praising him as he was speaking at an event. And they said, the voice of a God, not of a man. And Herod began to believe that he was indeed the voice of a God, not of a man. And God struck him dead in an instant. He let that moment get to him. He became prideful. I don't know if Noah stepped off the ark and began to think of himself as great, as someone super worthy who earned salvation just because he was such a great guy. I don't know that happened. But I do know that Noah was flawed. And his flaws ended up coming back to bite him. We have to be on guard. We have to be aware that we are not the heroes of the tale. Christ is. God is. We're the bit players. There's no dishonor in that. But if we don't know our role, we're setting ourselves up for failure. That's what I think we should take away from this last part here in Genesis 9. That's all we have here for today. We'll see you guys in the next Bible Bits in the next video. Till then, bye everybody.